I married Raymond because he is the son of my former boss, and 4 years ago, we tied the knot. Although we haven't started a family yet, we have enjoyed a generally happy life together. Raymond dedicates himself to his job and often has to be away, which leaves me feeling a bit lonely sometimes, but he makes up for it by spending quality time with me on his days off. I first met Raymond through my father, and it wasn't long before he suggested I should embrace the role of a stay-at-home wife. This arrangement gave me ample time to pursue my interests. I took up sewing and knitting, befriending our neighbors, and even started a fitness routine. Each winter, I would gift Raymond handmade scarves and gloves. Though my initial attempts were a bit amateurish, I steadily improved. His appreciative comments over the years encouraged me greatly, and I grew to love crafting even more. I dream of the day when we can perhaps sew together as a family. I once shared this thought with Raymond, and he entertained the idea of joining in when that time comes, offering me a warm smile in return. Our life might seem quite privileged to others, thanks to Raymond's substantial income. I never skimped on supporting him, managing the household, or making the most of the moments we shared on his days off. I imagined a quiet, content future with my kind husband and, hopefully, children. However, about 3 years ago, a troubling incident occurred. I was waiting for Raymond to return from work when I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Raymond rushed home just in time and hurriedly took me to the hospital. As I lay in my hospital bed recovering and vulnerable, Raymond, smiling, shockingly confessed, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." Seeing the scarves and gloves I had made for him carelessly discarded, devalued, and hearing his blunt words, I felt a strong urge to confront him with reality, to show him he was mistaken if he thought he could demean my worth. Despite the hurt, imagining his eventual realization of my value brought a wry smile to my face. I am Ashley Carroll, and this revelation was a harsh reality check on what I thought was a loving marriage. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a hospital bed. From the snippets of the conversation between Raymond and the doctors, I understood that my condition was serious and likely a lifelong issue to manage. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but the risk of recurrence meant that I needed to remain in the hospital for a while. Raymond tried to reassure me during one of his visits, holding my hand gently. "It looks like you'll be here for some time, but don't worry, I'll make time to visit and we'll get through this together." His presence and words eased my anxiety. Despite having no solid reason to believe so, I felt that everything might just turn out all right with my supportive husband by my side. True to his word, Raymond visited nearly every day. He would ask about my day, and, noticing how the hospital routine bored me, he even brought my favorite sewing tools. We spent our time together sewing and chatting about mundane daily events. Teaching my clumsy husband to sew became a highlight of my days, helping me to momentarily forget the dreariness of hospital life. This routine continued for about a year. I knitted a scarf for him as part of our yearly tradition, but after that, Raymond's visits became sporadic. Initially, I thought he was just caught up with work. I kept myself busy with sewing, planning to give him a pair of gloves I was making the next time he visited. Doctors had informed me that I was likely to be discharged by the end of the year. I poured all my emotions into crafting those gloves, hoping to bridge the gap created by the time we spent apart. However, when Raymond finally visited after a long absence, his reaction was chilling. He glanced coldly at the gloves I offered and said, "Are you still making these? It's honestly a nuisance now." He then handed me the scarf I had painstakingly knitted for him last year, untouched and pristine, along with divorce papers. Stunned, I could only stare as the reality sank in. The scarf, still as new as the day I had given it to him, and his harsh words, marked a painful end to what I had once believed was a supportive partnership. "Has it been 3 years since your hospitalization?" He remarked casually, "I heard you'll be discharged soon." His indifference was as cutting as the cold dismissal of everything I had cherished and invested my love in. "But I can't keep taking care of you," Raymond bluntly stated as he pushed the divorce papers toward me. I stared at them, stunned, as the weight of his words sunk in. His signature was already on the documents, a clear sign of his resolve. I had sensed this might happen, especially after his visits became less frequent. In an attempt to dismiss these fears, I had told myself he was just overwhelmed with work. However, the caring Raymond I knew would have kept me informed, no matter how busy he was. As he stood there waiting for my reaction, I managed to ask him calmly why he wanted a divorce. It wasn't out of desperation to hold on to him. Rather, I felt resigned, almost prepared for this moment. If the gentle Raymond I loved believed a divorce was necessary, perhaps he was right. Yet, part of me was confused because he was the one who had promised we would face this challenge together. Raymond's response was harsh and dismissive. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, all I've had are troubles. I'm sick and tired of the scarves and gloves you give me every year. I only married you because you're the boss's daughter. How can I be expected to deal with your illness on top of everything else?" He laughed mockingly, making it clear that he viewed my affectionate gestures as trivial and my illness as an inconvenience. As he spoke, I noticed a fancy, high-end scarf around his neck, one I did not recognize and certainly had not given him. It was superior to anything I had made. This realization hurt deeply. It seemed he had never appreciated any of my handmade gifts, possibly finding them annoying all along. In every discussion about happiness, love, or loneliness we had, Raymond had probably seen me as naive for cherishing these ideals. Who can even wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed nowadays? Receiving such things is a nuisance, he continued, his words cutting through the air like a knife. Looking at the divorce papers again, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because the man I loved had changed so drastically, and relief because at least now I knew the truth about how he truly felt. The clarity was painful but necessary. Unaware of the underlying motives, my hospitalization marked a shift in my relationship with Raymond. After my father retired from the company where Raymond worked, there was no longer a need for him to maintain appearances with me. Initially, Raymond seemed supportive, visiting me between work commitments. I now realize that these visits were more for the show, likely discussed at his workplace to paint him as a dedicated husband, managing his professional responsibilities while caring for his ill wife. This narrative had served him well, boosting his image among colleagues who viewed him as both hardworking and compassionate. He had cultivated this persona to his advantage, something I only came to understand later. During a candid conversation, Raymond admitted that discussing my illness at work garnered him sympathy and accolades. "It made things easier at work," he confessed without remorse. "If I stayed late, I was diligent. If I needed a break, all I had to mention was my sick wife." He even hinted that my illness had inadvertently helped him secure a promotion. "They're all idiots, but I have to thank your illness for that," he said with a cold grin. This revelation crushed me. The man I had loved was unrecognizable, revealing a selfishness I couldn't have imagined. As we concluded our conversation, I handed him the signed divorce papers with a simple farewell. "Well, if I could be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again, so take care." He took the papers and left promptly, showing no further interest. The divorce was a quiet affair, and in the solitude that followed, I wept. Eventually, I was discharged and returned to live with my parents. My father was outraged when he learned the full extent of Raymond's behavior. "I never thought he would be that kind of guy," he exclaimed. However, by then, I had found a sense of detachment and calm. I reassured him, expressing my desire to move back home after settling affairs at the house I had shared with Raymond. My parents were supportive, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. I decided to live with them for the time being. Before fully moving in, I planned one last visit to the house, perhaps to collect my things and close that chapter of my life for good. After my discharge from the hospital, I planned to return to the house where I had lived with my husband. However, upon arriving, I was confronted with a startling issue. The front door lock wasn't functioning. Puzzled, my parents and I decided to ring the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. In my confusion, I asked about his presence, and he informed us that he had purchased the house a few months ago and was now living there with his family. This revelation only intensified my parents' anger, but I chose not to disturb the new family and quietly walked away. Still, I needed answers, so I immediately called my husband. He casually confirmed over the phone, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. I'm keeping the sales money as compensation. It was my house to begin with, so you have no complaint, right?" His indifferent tone left me sighing in disbelief. I wished he had informed me sooner. From what the new owner shared, it seemed the house had been sold quite some time ago, likely about a year back when my husband's visits had ceased. Although our divorce had been finalized with the submission of our signed papers, we had agreed to discuss asset division and compensation after my discharge, planning a meeting for the following week. Yet, my husband had already acted on his own. I found his obliviousness troubling. Over the phone, I told him, "You don't understand anything, do you?" Confused, he asked, "Huh? What do you mean?" I responded, "I'll explain in detail next week," and hung up. I turned to my parents, who were visibly worried, and asked my father for a favor. He quickly prepared the necessary documents for the upcoming discussion. Despite the short notice, he assured me, "I've got it all prepared. There's not much time, but we'll manage." His determination was partly fueled by guilt for having introduced me to my husband and his resulting anger towards him. As we prepared for the meeting, held at my family's home, my parents and I sat in a line facing my husband, who was alone on the other side. Despite the strain the divorce had placed on my relationship with my parents, my husband appeared unconcerned, even displaying a slight smirk. During the discussion, he maintained, "I'm the victim here. However, I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice." His tone suggested he was being generous, but his smugness was palpable. As he spoke, my father's face turned crimson with anger. I placed my hand on him to calm him, knowing that in this situation we held the advantage. "There's something important we need to discuss first," I began. At that moment, my father presented a document. The land on which the house stood was owned by him. "The house was indeed in your name," I acknowledged to my husband. "However, the land on which it stands belongs to my father." This revelation shifted the dynamic significantly, clarifying that while my husband might have sold the house, he had no right to the land it was built on. When I pointed out to my husband that my father still held the title to the land where our house stood, he was visibly taken aback but tried to mask it with a dismissive tone. "So what? The house was mine. No one has the right to complain. Do you think you can retaliate against me with that?" He scoffed, thinking the situation was laughable. "Yes, the house was in your name," I acknowledged calmly, "and you probably checked that there were no legal issues with selling it." However, I continued to explain the broader implications. "From a legal standpoint, you're right. There was no problem with you selling the house. But think about the family that bought it. They own the house, but not the land it sits on. If my father chooses, he could demand rent from them, which would surely cause issues." I let that sink in for a moment before adding, "Of course, neither my father nor I plan to demand rent or evict them. We're not interested in causing distress. However, we can't just give up the rights to the land either. We could sell the land directly to the family, ensuring they have complete ownership. This would prevent any potential legal disputes they might face, or that you might face from them. The new owners, understandably, were upset when they learned about this complication. They realized that any issues arising from this oversight would fall on the seller, my husband. They were prepared to take legal action if necessary, which visibly worried him. Seeing his pale face, I could tell he grasped the severity of his oversight. He asked in a shaky voice, "What should I do then?" I replied with a small smile, "The best course of action would be for the family to purchase the land from us. This would consolidate their ownership of both the house and the land, resolving all current legal ambiguities." I explained further, of course they weren't aware they needed to buy the land when they purchased the house. They will likely seek compensation from you for this unexpected expense, especially since the land is in a prime location and could potentially cost more than they paid for the house itself. This situation placed my husband in a difficult position, but it was a consequence of his decisions. By selling the house without considering the ownership of the land, he had created a complex issue not just for himself but for the innocent family involved. Now he faced the potential financial repercussions of his actions, which could include compensating the new owners for the additional cost of the land to rectify the situation fully. Despite my husband Raymond's maneuvers, his options were limited and financially perilous. If he chose to give up all his assets, he'd be left with nothing, not a single penny in his name. Alternatively, he could attempt to buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee for the family currently living there. This would return both the land and house to his possession, potentially allowing him to sell them once more. However, given the costs involved, especially the relocation fee, it was unlikely he'd come out ahead financially. On top of the financial mess, there was the issue of emotional damages. "Raymond, your actions have caused me significant mental distress," I told him, my voice steady and resolute. "I plan to seek compensation for that. Keep that in mind." Throughout our marriage, Raymond had used me as a stepping stone for his career advancement. Now that I was aware of his manipulations, I was thoroughly disgusted by his previous gestures, which I once thought were acts of love. I intended to file for damages due to the emotional distress this caused. Although proving emotional distress in court could be challenging and the likelihood of winning was uncertain, merely raising the issue was important given his current circumstances. Cornered by his dwindling options, Raymond was visibly shaken. To compound his dismay, my father added fuel to the fire. Despite being retired and no longer a part of the company, my father maintained strong connections. "I've been in touch with my old colleagues," he mentioned with a hint of satisfaction. "They've been quite vocal about their disapproval of how you've treated my daughter." My father's words underscored that Raymond's reputation at his workplace was deteriorating, and his unethical actions were no longer a secret. As we sat across from each other to discuss the terms of the property division and compensation, my demeanor was calm but firm. "Now that you understand the situation, we need to settle the division of property and compensation," I stated, clasping my hands and offering a smile that was far different from any smile I had shown him during our marriage. This one was of someone reclaiming their power. Captivated by my resolve and the reality of his dire financial and social standing, all Raymond could manage was a forced laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. The negotiations that followed were decidedly in my favor. Resigned to his fate, Raymond agreed to the terms, which included paying me alimony. This meeting was not just a negotiation about financial terms, it was a moment of profound realization for Raymond. It highlighted the consequences of his actions and marked the end of his manipulative tactics. With each decision made, I felt a sense of closure and empowerment, finally turning the page on a challenging chapter of my life. We ultimately decided that Raymond would purchase the land where our house was situated, ensuring that the family who had bought our home could live there without legal complications. We explained the situation to them, and thankfully they were understanding and appreciative of our efforts to rectify the matter. In the end, everyone involved found a resolution that worked for them, except for Raymond. The discussions and subsequent decisions left him significantly out of pocket. To make matters worse, the rumors my father had inadvertently set in motion began to take their toll on his company. His colleagues' perception of him changed drastically, and his once promising promotion was indefinitely postponed by upper management due to concerns about his integrity and professionalism. These rumors continued to erode his reputation, eventually leading him to resign from his position. While I could attribute his downfall to karma, it was a stark reminder that gains made through exploitation are precarious and can easily crumble. Meanwhile, I returned to living with my parents and started running a sewing class from their home. It wasn't a bustling enterprise, but it was fulfilling. My classes, attended by neighborhood wives and their children, provided me with a decent income. While I had once dreamed of teaching my children to sew, life had taken a different turn. Now, I found joy in sharing my skills and passion for sewing with others in the community. This new chapter wasn't just about making ends meet, it was about finding contentment and community in sharing what I love, confirming that happiness sometimes comes from the most unexpected places.